As a qualified practitioner, you'll know that our understanding of autism is ever evolving. More autistic clients are coming into the therapy room, and people are actively looking for a therapist who understands neurodivergence. Counselling Tutor's Autism-Informed Practice Training is a 45-hour CPD qualification built by a neurodivergent team. A balance of self-directed learning and an intimate live workshop where the theory comes to life. Download your free handbook at counsellingtutor.com. Click Products and select Autism Informed Practice.
Hello and welcome to episode 373 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory, and today I'm joined by returning guest Erene Hadjiioannou. Erene is an integrative psychotherapist who supports survivors of all genders in recovering from sexual violence and also delivers specialist training on pre-trial therapy. She has produced a number of excellent lectures for the Counsellor CPD Library, including one exploring the work of pre-trial therapy guidelines. Today, Erene joins us to discuss the potential impact on clients and the therapeutic practice following the Department of Justice new rules regarding police requests for counselling notes, which came into force in January of 2026. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 373 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly. Rory and I today taking you on a trip with 3 stops, starting off with ethical sustainable practice, where today we're delving into making defensible decisions around any kind of technology or AI or automation that you have in your practice. We then go into Practice Matters, and Rory has already introduced Erene, who is going to be speaking about something that comes up all the time, and that's counselling notes and the law. And it certainly has changed quite a bit since I trained Rory. And then we're going on to Student Services, where we recognise you, the students, on your journey to become formal counsellors, psychotherapists, or to learn those all-important skills. And today we're going to be speaking about balancing time and training. And of course, we have Sarah Henry, our roving correspondent, who's going to be weighing in on that topic too. But Rory, starting off, making defensible decisions. Now, this is something we need to do in counselling and psychotherapy all the time, but we're speaking specifically now around the tech that you might adopt in your counselling practice.
Yes, absolutely, Ken. And just to remind everyone that as therapists, certainly if you're working under any ethical framework, we have a duty of candour. And that means that if we think something is endangering our clients or indeed colleagues or the general public, we need to call it out. If your organisation is doing something that may seriously disadvantage the people that you're working with, be they clients or colleagues or the general public, as I've said, then we have a duty of candour to call that out. And, you know, working with the duty of candour means that we need to think about how we present our case. So if there's something that we're not happy with, we make what we call a defensible decision. And that really matters because in terms of AI, because up to this point, the focus has really been really on your practice, and it may even include your own reactions to AI. But it's presenting in practice more and more. We've talked about this on the podcast a lot. And at some point, you may need to make a decision about AI in your practice. And when this happens, you can't just go on instinct alone. You can't go to your manager and say, well, I don't like AI. I think it's wrong. Or this AI app doesn't work. What you need to be thinking about is why. You need to be able to explain, justify, and stand professionally behind what your concern is. And I guess, Ken, it's moving from instinct to process, isn't it? It's going from that gut feeling, there's something wrong here, to process.
Oh, couldn't agree more. And I think this extends beyond AI, although we are delving specifically into AI during this season because it's a very, very hot topic. But it's any application or piece of technology, including the email provider that you use, anything that you use within your practice where client information is crossing into that or it's being used in a practice application. And as you said, Rory, you know, we've already spoken about mindset, and this is mindset specifically towards AI and how you might look at that and what might come up for you when you look at that and how we can project into that whatever messaging we might have heard from the different places we might have gained our information, and we can hold a bias. And when we're talking about defensible decision making, it takes it away from what our gut might say. Because I might see something, a little piece of software maybe that a colleague shows me and think, oh, that's brilliant. That is. I love that. Oh, that's going to be really useful in my practice. And that's my gut reaction to it. But if I was called to account, if something went wrong with that software, my gut reaction to whether I thought it was good or bad is not going to stand me in good stead. We need to make a defendable decision for anything that we use within our practice. And we're doing this all the time anyway, I guess, Rory. We're making defendable decisions. Give us some examples of where in other areas not related to technology, we're making a defensible decision when we do something. I guess a referral, you're making a defendable decision right there, Rory.
Yeah, a referral where you're referring someone on to a different provider. Breaking confidentiality would be a classic example of a defensible decision, because if you break confidentiality, you're going to have, if a complaint is brought against you, you're going to have to explain your thinking and the process behind your thinking for breaking confidentiality. And the term defensible decision making, I think, isn't just in counselling. You go to any profession, nurses, doctors, prison officers, police officers, fire officers, and any decision that anybody makes has to be defensible. You cannot say, oh, I broke confidentiality because it felt like the right thing to do. Because if someone says, well, can you tell me what your thinking behind that is? And you go, well, not really. It just felt like the right thing to do. You could find yourself in some difficulty if there's a complaint. If you've got a process you go through to show where your difficulty is, why you've done something, what evidence you've got that might be harm being done, then you've got a very, very good chance of fighting your corner, as we say in my part of the world, of fighting your corner. But you have to get into that mindset of making a defendable decision. And it's something that we're called upon more and more now in our profession.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Rory. I think that really frames defendable decision-making beautifully. And I guess, you know, what do we mean by defendable decision-making? Well, you would have a documented chain of how you thought. So we're going to speak now about a bit of technology that you may be using, why you chose X email provider or whatever it may be, why you chose to use X video platform to meet with your clients. If anything went wrong and you were held to account, you would need to show why you were using that particular platform, and you would go back and you would have documented defendable decision making. And it's not about making the perfect choice, because things can go wrong, and that's understandable. It's about showing how you arrived at a decision, to show that you were professional, that you considered this and you asked yourself a few questions before just going ahead and ticking the I confirm to the terms and condition box. So here's a few questions that you might want to kind of think about if you're talking about technology within your practice. Why did you choose it? So if you make a choice on a certain piece of software or an AI tool, why did you choose it? Or why did you not choose it? Because you can apply defensible decision making and come to the conclusion that you're not going to do something, but you would still document that process. What you considered before using it. So when you decided, I'm going to look for a way that I can email my clients, okay, I'm going to need a email platform that is not going to be read by the person who hosts the email. So, for example, Gmail, if you have a Gmail account, when you've clicked the yes to the terms and conditions in Gmail, it pretty much says that they can read all of your emails. So you might be not choosing that and going to a more secure platform for your emails with your clients, because it may contain sensitive data. So why you considered using that? I'll leave you with one more. What checks you carried out? Well, that's where the thinking comes in, because to make those checks, you've got to be asking yourself those questions. What am I looking for here, Rory?
Yes, I think you've framed that beautifully, Ken. And I think you should also be able to explain, if asked, what were your concerns. So when you make a decision, and we talk about email platforms, why did you choose platform A and not platform B, email provider A and not email provider B? So you'd have to be able to clearly outline your concerns. And I think Ken's given a really good example of that. I'm not using Gmail because it's widely known that Gmail sift through emails. It's automatically done to look for, they're basically looking for any areas where they can leverage advertising, aren't they? And data. They're using big data to leverage advertising. I would imagine that Gmail haven't told me this, but this is the thinking. So first of all, the concerns, then moving into what evidence inform those concerns. And there you'd be looking for trusted sources of information, easily found on the internet, technical websites, or people have done some research into email providers. And then once you've evidenced that, you then think about evidencing what advice or supervision you had. So you might take an outside view. You might go to someone who knows a lot about email platforms, or you may even just talk about it in supervision, just to get a sense of if you're in the right direction. And then finally, and I think this is the most important thing, how your position relates to client welfare, confidentiality, fairness, and good practice. Because ultimately, it's literally the bottom line on this list, and it is in real life the bottom line, because all our actions should really focus on client welfare, confidentiality, being equitable in practice, and good practice. So you need to do that as well. And I would say, in terms of able to explain, documented evidence is probably the best way to go. And bear this in mind, the aim is not to prove you're right. The aim is to prove your decision was a thoughtful, responsible, and professional defence. So this isn't about right or wrong. This is about defending what you believe to be a path that you've taken. And when it comes to explain, I can't speak more strongly about documented evidence, because if there's a complaint raised, you'll almost certainly have to produce this bundle of evidence for a panel to have a look at and to take a view on how your thinking pattern emerged and the processes you did to come to the decision that you made.
Yeah, if this sounds like a lot and you're thinking, wow, I don't even know what questions I should be asking here, that's okay. Just bear with us, because as we go through this series, we're going to be digging deeper and deeper into this topic, and we're actually going to be giving you the actual critical thinking matrix that have got all the questions on that you can be asking if you're looking or considering a tool, whether it be AI or just a tool, a digital tool within your practice. So this is kind of laying the foundation for that and giving you the reasons why, because at the end of the day, if you do find yourself having to defend yourself in a complaints hearing, that defendable decision is going to stand you in good stead. And it's questions like, did you read the terms and conditions that can trip us up? Because you know as well as I do, these terms and conditions just go on forever. They're written in a language called legalese, which I definitely don't understand at all. It's very heavy reading, and I think that some may say that they're purposely designed that way. that you don't know what you're looking at really, and you just click I agree at the bottom there. But when you are clicking I agree, what we need to realize is you're not making a decision for yourself to use a piece of software. You're making a decision for all of your clients that may interact with that piece of software in some way. So if it's your email provider and you're emailing your clients and that is not secure and it may be read, you've made that decision, albeit maybe unconsciously at the time when you were signing up for Gmail. And I'm just using that as an example. So when it comes to terms and conditions, usually if you can think about an application you use, so take Zoom, for example. Maybe you use Zoom for looking for meeting with your clients. If you go online and say Zoom terms and conditions, you will actually be able to find their page where they will list out their terms and conditions. The same is true for most reputable applications or tools that you may use, whether they be AI or not AI. If you look for their terms and conditions and they're hidden or you don't see them, then that is already a cause for concern. But if you can find those terms and conditions, you can actually copy the whole page or however long that goes on for and put it into a free AI tool. And I'm going to just say ChatGPT, but there's lots of others. And you can say to it, I'm a UK counsellor. I work to UK GDPR. These terms and conditions are too long for me to read. What do I need to know to keep my client's data safe? And it'll tell you what the areas are that you might need to think about. So there is a quick way, and that's an ethical way of using AI to help you in service of your practice and your clients as well. Because as Rory said, we're asking ourselves those questions, but sometimes they're a little bit difficult to come to a real answer. So having that may help slightly. And as we go on in this topic, we're going to be using more and more examples of what you may use and some tools that you can use to be able to help you in this defensible decision-making process. So I guess reflections, if you're thinking, how does this apply to me, is have a think about any of the tools that you use in your practice at the moment. Everything from your calendar to emails to how you meet with those clients. If you're meeting digitally, what are you using to do that? Are you texting? How are you communicating? What are the services that you might be using? And think, have I looked at these and would I be able to defend the decision of using these tools? And, as we go on, we're going to be speaking about things like informed consent, which is a law here under UK GDPR. If a client's data is going into something, the client has to be informed. They have to know exactly what it is and why it's used, how it works, and they need to give you that informed consent. And that's maybe a good starting point of, do I need informed consent for any of the tools that I am using? And maybe it's an opportunity to start that process of defendable decision making for each one of the apps you're using. And in our last episode, Rory, we spoke about the different kinds of AI that we might come across as practitioners. And one of them is DMHTs, the Digital Mental Health Tools. Go and have a listen to episode 372 if you missed that one. But what we're seeing is that if we're working with the DMHT, then the defensible decision-making is that we would expect that this tool would be robust and appropriate. It's been handed to us in a professional way. We know that there's oversight. But the example that we've got in the handout here is if you were working in a practice, in an agency, and suddenly the agency said, hey, we've just got this great new tool that we're all going to use for practice management. Well, you're at liberty to ask some questions. You can raise a concern, and you can raise a concern based on these questions. And raising that concern doesn't mean that you're criticizing. It means that you are doing defendable decision making for the clients that you will be seeing through that platform. Because as we always say on this podcast, whether you be in an agency or in the NHS, it's still your practice. You are the responsible party with that client. And if you're called on to defend the use of something, it's you that has to defend that decision, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a hard lesson and maybe hard to hear, but ultimately it's your practice. So the buck stops with you. There used to be a sign on an American president's desk saying the buck stops here. In other words, they were the people fully responsible for what went on, and certainly in your practice, the buck stops with you. So I would say, don't be frightened about this process. I know it's a lot to take in. I know that we've moved into a completely new world when we come to AI very quickly, and you can't run away from it. You can't say, well, it's not for me, I'm not going to be using it, because it will be imposed on you. If you're using anything across the internet that sends an email or stores your client notes, you're going to have to be vigilant. It's one of those things that I'm afraid we're going to have to look at whether we like it or not. And I would say supervision. Come into our Facebook group, because we have a very vibrant Facebook group, Counselling Tutor, into Facebook. Lots of people talking about new technologies, AI in practice. And don't be frightened. Don't think that your voice isn't something to be heard. You'd be surprised just the power of a defensible decision. Because remember, if you're called to account, you've got evidence and documentation that goes into the whole proceedings. That becomes part of the evidence base. So I would say, sometimes we're called upon to show courage, but I think, Ken, we need to acknowledge that this new world of technology can be a little unnerving for people who are kind of being pulled into it, I guess.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, I haven't done any of that kind of stuff, it's okay. It really is okay. There's plenty of time, and it can be done retrospectively as well. Just because you're using a certain tool and you haven't done the defensible decision or documented your defensible decision around that doesn't mean you can't do it now or in the near future. And this podcast is really going to help. As we go over the next weeks, we're going to be giving you 10 questions or 10 domains that you can actually map your thinking to. They're really, really simple. There's nothing technical about them, and we'll give you handouts for every single one of them. All of this information is taken from the book that is published by Counselling Tutor. It's called Ethical AI in Practice for Counsellors and Psychotherapists in the UK, specifically for us, specifically around our UK GDPR, specifically around our data protection laws here in the United Kingdom. And it's a guide that is written in a really easy way to take you through that whole process. As this goes live, Rory, I'm very excited to say I've just got the final formatting back from our formatter. It's ready to publish, and I've got the book cover design as well. So we're so near to publishing that. And of course, when we do publish it, we'll give a shout out here on the Counselling Tutor podcast, let you know where you can go and look at that. It's going to be on Amazon. And what we'll do also retrospectively, we'll put links in for all of the episodes where we've covered AI, if you did want to delve a little bit deeper into that. And I guess, Rory, that is today's ethical sustainable practice. The handout is really comprehensive. It's called What Defensible Decision Making Actually Looks Like. It's a free handout. You can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com, clicking on the podcast tab, make your way to episode 373. That's today's episode, and you can download it. Everything we've spoken about is there, including a live case study that kind of walks you through it. And then we've got all of the questions, why you chose it, what you're considered before using it, what checks you carried out, and more, that you can kind of map your thinking to as you go about doing your own defensible decision making. And there's even a little reflections for CPD section at the bottom there of how you can apply this in your own practice to make your practice robust and show that you think about the tools you use with your clients and how they impact you, your practice, and your clients. So there it is. That is episode 373, counsellingtutor.com. Click on that tab and go and download that. So running out of breath here,
Take a
Rory.
breath,
That
mate.
is
Take a
ethical,
breath.
sustainable. Breathe. That is ethical, sustainable practice. We're now going on to one of my favourite spots in Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's the Practice Matters, where we have the interviews. And today, all around notes and the law. And kind of when we went into this, Rory, I was saying it changed from where I actually trained. Because the law came in, digital laws came in. There's actually a lot of difference, and how important it is to kind of watch what the law says and then how we actually manage and work within our practices.
Yeah, absolutely can. And what I would say is that there has been a change in the law in England and Wales. We caught up with Erene, and she told us about what these changes are in terms of having your notes requested by the police. I caught up with her, and this is what she said.
If you're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got one that could do with an upgrade, WebHealer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners £100 off the cost of a website design and build. WebHealer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's all they do. Their team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution so that you can focus on your time with your clients. They've been doing this for over 20 years and are a trusted name amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. Get the full package details and claim your £100 off coupon at counsellingtutor.com/website.
On the 12th of January 2026, a press release appeared on the UK government website, published by the Home Office and Jess Phillips MP, with the accompanying headline, "New rules on police requesting counselling notes came into force." Effectively, this announcement better protects the privacy and dignity of victims of rape and sexual assaults, including strict limits on when police can request private counselling notes. The changes aim to reduce further trauma and encourage more victims to come forward, improving confidence in the justice system. My guest today is no stranger campaigning for better protections for victims of abuse. We welcome back Erene Hadjiioannou. So, Erene, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess what we're talking about is the changing guidance. So from a therapeutic perspective, how important is confidentiality in helping survivors of rape or sexual abuse become safe enough to engage in counselling? It's a bit of a, it's a bit of a null point really, because I think we all know, but I think it's a good starting point.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because sometimes with survivors of abuse that I'm working with, we sort of explore the difference between secrecy and privacy, which has all sorts of implications for somebody who has experienced abuse. And there's really something important about privacy when somebody's accessing, therapy, often sometimes for the first time, really. As a therapist, sometimes you're the first person that they're disclosing to, and that's such a precious thing to hold in a way. So confidentiality, absolute cornerstone of this kind of work for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that previously, one of the things that could be a barrier to someone going to court, getting a legal remedy, as it's sometimes referred to, is the fact that the police, as a matter of course, would request notes. Those notes would be sent to the police. No real understanding of who was reading them. Now, I'm sure our colleagues in the police act appropriately, and we thank them for the service, of course. But to have a third party or a fourth party read over them, the very details of someone's life and the trauma they've suffered, in my experience of a therapist, has put people off proceeding.
Yeah, For sure. So the area we're touching on today overlaps with something that we call pretrial therapy. So within different parts of the UK, there's different versions of what's called the pretrial therapy guidelines. So in our conversation, we're referring to the legal system in England and Wales, and that is overseen by the Crown Prosecution Service. And obviously the police are part of that legal system too. But yeah, in terms of requests for therapy notes as evidence in criminal proceedings, if I use the really, really kind of, technical clinical terms around it, yes, those requests are often experienced as intrusive by survivors, by victims of crimes in general. And it's, a massive impingement on, confidentiality, as we've just spoken to. And there's something really important in what you're describing around, well, if my notes are shared with this third party, the police or the CPS, or even with a judge or magistrates within the court, whose eyes are on them? Like, whose hands are on them? And I'm using those words kind of deliberately because it risks replicating the original trauma. So we do have to think really carefully about this.
Yeah, and I don't think you can take this too lightly. It takes an enormous amount of courage to come forward and speak to someone about what's happened. And, you talked earlier about secrecy and, confidentiality. A lot of what happens to people, certainly in childhood, has been a secret. It's been and all the connotations that go with that. And then they come to speak with someone, they come to unpack what's gone on for them, and then they think, I need a legal remedy. And sometimes, I don't know if it's ever come across in your practice, but that legal remedy isn't only for the clients, it's for other people. I've had people who wanted to go to court because the perpetrator is now in another family unit, and there's a fear of what happened to them would happen to other children. And then to send the notes to a third party is, it can be re-traumatizing.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate you giving us maybe one example of how a client might come into contact with the legal system, but there's obviously lots of other examples. It might be that they were unfortunately part of a group of people who'd experienced abuse, and somebody from that group has decided to report. So, the client then becomes approached. And in terms of therapy notes being requested or court ordered as evidence, this can happen whilst we're working with that client. It can also happen long after they've engaged with our services. So this whole thing covers actually quite a wide area. And re-traumatizing is unfortunately often clients' experiences of this, although it doesn't necessarily have to be. I've certainly worked with folks where the idea of their therapy notes being shared is in part an experience of, well, I'm using my voice a little bit, or my therapist is allied with me, and we're, trying to contribute to hopefully seeking justice in an often very disempowering system with low conviction rates. So it's quite mixed in my experience.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the other thing, is the conviction rates are low. There's been quite a high-profile case recently, or I think maybe 18 months ago, where someone brought a prosecution against a well-known therapist, someone who'd been on the TV, and they couldn't get a criminal conviction, but they had to get remedy in a civil matter, and they won the civil case, where the barrier of evidence is lower. It's more reason. It's more a balance of probability than reasonable doubt. Not that I'm a lawyer.
Yeah, it's interesting with the civil system, because obviously it's different from the criminal system. And actually, if you're going down the civil route, you're often paying for your own legal representation, say a solicitor. You're also suing for damages, so seeking monetary compensation. So if it goes in your favour, that person's not being imprisoned. I think I appreciate you're knowledgeable in this area, but for anybody listening, if they're not sure how the legal system works or how it's slightly different, there's a few different ways that survivors can seek justice, and it can be so uniquely individual to them and their wishes and their circumstances. Yeah,
just give us some examples of the routes that the clients may travel or look at when it comes to getting a legal remedy?
Yeah, I think with the criminal justice process, it tends to be the more well understood, I guess it's not the best phrase, but the more well traveled route. I always kind of think about what the idea of justice is for each individual client, because for some it is definitely, I want them locked up. We need to, protect other people. The abuse needs to stop with me, whatever that might be. And I have to say, I haven't supported any clients myself that have gone down the civil route, but I'm aware of it and that it happens, even though it's much more rare. And like I say, often you have to cover your own legal costs, but both processes can be relatively lengthy and complicated and intrusive. But again, for the clarity of listeners, we're talking more about the criminal justice kind of area here today. And you'll have to excuse me for being super specific, but this is such a complex, nuanced area. I really want to, I guess if I use a legal term, try not to... what's the phrase? For the avoidance of any doubt, I want to be super, super clear, because I've worked with so many therapists that, if you're not used to working in this area, it's very, very confusing. You can get thrown really easily.
Yes, and I think it's maybe pertinent at this point to say that you offer training in this area. Would I be right?
Yeah, I offer training on pretrial therapy. I've been doing that for over a decade. My work in that area has also included like activism, like lobbying to change the pretrial therapy guidelines. So yes, and I've written on this topic extensively, including a book, and I've also got some resources in your wonderful CPD library and some on my own website that will be published within the next couple of weeks as well.
Fantastic, and we will put a link to your website in the show notes of the podcast, and people will be able to go to the show notes, click on that, and then go and have a look at the resources that you have. I just want, while we're talking about the avoidance of doubt, I think it's useful for something that was said earlier. This guidance is for England and Wales, isn't it?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. And that is because this has come from the English Parliament. Would that be correct?
In terms of the particular code of practice that we're looking at today, that's from the Home Office. So the full name of the guidance they've released is called Victim Information Requests Code of Practice. That sits alongside the Crown Prosecution Service guidelines on pretrial therapy. So you can take both of those together.
Fantastic. And is there any movement? Have you heard of any movements in maybe Scotland or Northern Ireland? But will they be following the same route, or are we still awaiting information?
I'm not sure. Unfortunately, it's not my area. So beyond this podcast, you do need to seek further advice, unfortunately. But in terms of, in general, pretrial therapy guidelines, whatever version it is that you're looking for, a quick internet search will lead you to the right place. In general, my experience is that the legal system tries to work on transparency anyway, and that's part of facilitating trust with the general public and encouraging people to report. So a lot of this stuff is just generally available online if you're a bit of a nerd like me and you like to read legal guidance. But it is there for you to look at and share with your clients if you need to.
Yes, and of course, the guidance now is that it's a senior police officer that has to sign off if the notes are needed. So it isn't standard procedure. It's certainly in every case I've worked with where it's gone to law, I get a phone call off a police officer who asks for the notes or an email, and then you have to have a chat with the client and contract with the client and send the notes. I think it's really important that when we take notes, we make sure that they are factual. They're not our opinions, are they? We are not opining here. We are just reflecting. Can you give us a flavour of maybe good practice in note taking, what we would do and what we should avoid doing?
Sure, I can give a nutshell version, but when I'm training on this topic, we spend at least an hour on it, partly because therapists understandably have lots and lots of questions.
Yeah.
But so in general, something that's really important for therapists to remember is that we are we write notes for clinical purposes and not criminal proceedings. So the idea that you absolutely have to write notes in more detail or give your professional opinion, etc., just because somebody's going through the criminal justice system or they're thinking about reporting at the time they're accessing your services is something that we should not be doing. For one thing, it's not necessary. And also, I mean, it's just not our job. But also, in doing so, we avoid unnecessary policing of our clients and the things they choose to share with us. So as a general principle, if you're considering how you write notes across your entire client base, if you consider it's clinically justifiable, then going ahead and doing that is absolutely fine. So that kind of ticks the boxes with regards to the GDPR guidance we have to follow, which is around data minimization. So we collect the absolute minimal amount of data that is necessary for, offering our services. Equally, if you are an individual practitioner or an organization that says, if someone makes a disclosure, this is the level of detail you have to record and why, for the purposes of offering our services and safeguarding, whatever it might be, you can still continue to follow those internal procedures you might have anyway. So I'm going to pause on that point because there's lots more I could say, but I'll follow your lead on that.
I think that's really valuable information, and I do think that if you're working for an organisation or an agency, being cognizant of the policies and procedures of notes is really, really important, isn't it? To actually know what's the expectation, certainly in cases of any disclosure. How do you think that this new guidance will be received by therapists and clients?
I'm thinking positively because in practice, it doesn't actually tell us anything new, but what it does do is collate lots of different information together to reinforce the fact that victims of crimes who are accessing therapy, have a right to firstly access therapy without any input from the criminal justice process. And also that, their therapy notes should not be requested as a matter of course. And they do go on to actually make quite a lot of specific points in this area. So, for example, there's a point that says authorized person. So as you say, an example is a senior police officer, should start with the presumption that requests for therapy, like they call it counselling information, but we're talking about therapy notes more broadly, that requests for counselling information are not necessary and proportionate, and that access to these kinds of what they call third-party material should never occur as a matter of course. So I welcome this. I think it's really important to actually start to cement, I think, the standardization of kind of practice on the sort of police and the CPS's side, because where I'm based in West Yorkshire, in general, I've had pretty good contact with the police and the CPS.
Yes.
That's not everyone's experience, and it's certainly not the experiences of the survivors that we work with. So as an absolute baseline, I think the code actually really strengthens our position as therapists and protects our clients' confidentiality a bit more closely.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because the actual press release from the government was, I found it by accident. I was just doing some research and trolling through the internet, and it kind of popped up, and I thought, oh, goodness, this is something that I wouldn't have known about had I not been kind of trolling information through the internet. I put it on LinkedIn, and it was reposted hundreds and hundreds of times. Just put the link in. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, we can't speak for professional bodies, but I wonder, would it be helpful if professional bodies actually amplified this to the general public? Because in my experience, clients are very, very frightened of information going to third parties, or what will people think. There's a huge amount of shame in a lot of the engagements. So I wonder what we might say together to professional bodies about making this clear to those members of the public who encounter their resources.
Yeah, 100%, particularly because if I go back to specifically the pretrial therapy guidelines, by the CPS, for about 20 years, there was a clause within the guidelines that said that, a victim of a crime couldn't, talk about what happened in therapy if they happened to be also undertaking the criminal justice process at the same time. And unfortunately, along with that is, again, a long history of, it seems to be relatively intrusive and inconsistent kind of legal procedure that has really put people off reporting and or accessing support. So we do need to do more to say and to communicate to the general public that you can access therapy and seek support at the same time. You do have a right to a confidential service, and actually there's far more choice and control that is available to clients when it comes to specifically requests for therapy notes as well. So yeah, I mean, my brain's buzzing because, like I say, there's so much in this area, but I think those are some of the key points. Because actually the clause that a person can't talk about what happened to them in therapy hasn't been in place since May 2022 when the pretrial guidelines changed. My travels have taught me that not every therapist or organisation is necessarily aware of or confident of that. So it is our responsibility to just be really transparent about clients' rights in all of this.
Yes, I'm sure that the professional bodies, who I'm sure listen to this podcast, or I'd like to think listen to it.
I hope so.
Will be thinking, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe we do something on that. Maybe they already have. But I think that misinformation that you talked about pretrial therapy guidelines, it still permeates around. People still believe this. They come up with terrible cases of where someone couldn't access therapy because of going to trial. In fact, in Manchester, there was someone who was a victim of someone who worked at Chetham's music school. You may be aware of this case. And they were told that they weren't allowed to access therapy because it was going to court. And it went to court, the person was convicted. And then shortly after that, the person who was the victim, sadly took their own life.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely not the first example I've heard of that, and it just shouldn't be happening, really. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is also legal professionals not being aware themselves of their own kind of legal guidance. So, I mean, I've certainly kind of had examples of encouraging therapists who've attended training that I've offered that have said, "Oh, we've been told we can't offer therapy until the survivor's engagement with the criminal justice system has concluded." And I'm like, "Well, you can waive the CPS guidance at the CPS if you need to." I appreciate I can be really playful about it because I've been doing this work for a very long time, but we need to be super, super consistent and clear in our messaging. Otherwise, you've just described the worst example of, the gaps that survivors fall through.
Yes.
Like, that just shouldn't be happening.
Yes. So let's hope that this new information gets out, that it's shared amongst therapists, and certainly the great work that you've done and the contribution you've made to this. I mean, having looked at the input you've had an incredible input into changing the way that victims of crime are engaged with by the Crown Prosecution Service. And you've also done a lecture for our CPD library. So if you are a member, have a look at that. We're going to put the link to your training in the show notes. So it just goes for me to say, Erene Hadjiioannou, thank you so much for joining us.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com. Massive thank you to Erene, thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions. That was Practice Matters. We now move on to student services. Today in student services, a topic that comes up all the time in the Facebook group, and for very good reason. It's about balancing your time and your training, the reality of being a counselling student. It's an evergreen topic. We touch on it from time to time. And I think, Rory, when we taught alongside one another, we recognise that so often, even though it was made clear at the beginning of the course that this was pretty intense stuff, we would still get the students going, wow, this is a lot. This is a lot to carry.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think that, the timing of this conversation is quite critical. It'll go out in April of 2026, where a lot of students may be doing are now thinking of moving up and doing either a diploma or going on to a degree. And I think it's going to be useful for both myself and you to talk about the realities of time management, and both in the classroom, and I'm going to be speaking to Sarah about the classroom aspect, and I'm going to be speaking really about the personal side of things, because when I trained, it literally turned my life upside down. I went from kind of bobbing along, going down the pub on a Friday with my friends, to literally being a hermit for 2 years, because the pace of the work was quite frenetic. And not only that, but I had to renegotiate with my family about my availability, because I found that every bit of spare time I had was taken up with study. I would say it's a really, really tough course. Training to be a counsellor, certainly at diploma level, is really, really tough. It's not like any other course that you'll do. And in fact, sometimes the people we trained had done degrees, master's degree. I think I had someone had done a PhD. And they all said, there's so many moving parts to this. There's a placement, there is your supervision, there's the relentless criteria that you've got to hit. There's the changing emotional mood in yourself, because as you go through training, from a lot of people, I'd say the majority, their view of the world changes. They reconstruct their own reality. It can be very tough on yourself and those around you. So I think going in with both your eyes open to training is really important. And I think what I would say, Ken, is I trained, I qualified in 2004. I think you qualified a few years after me. I would say, from what I can see, it's probably a little bit tougher now in terms of there's more criteria, there's more laws to navigate around. There's a whole load of new awareness around diversity, which really wasn't as visible as it is now, and it should be visible. So I think it's about the realities of training, Ken, and and it's as we've seen from a student side and from the teaching side. It can be a tough road, can't it?
It is, yeah. It is a tough road, and you've touched on some of the most important parts of that, Rory. But studying in itself is a massive ask. I watched my daughter go through her degree and her masters, and it took up all of her time, and that was just studying. A placement where you're going in and you're giving your hours and you're being there for clients and needing to collect, let's say, 100 hours to be able to qualify is a big ask. Going to supervision and bringing your placement client load to your supervisor in a informed manner is a big ask. And so often, while going through this process, students may even hold a full-time job. And they may also have a family that requires them to do certain tasks and be there in certain ways. So it's such a lot. It's almost like, I think it's like doing 3 different study courses all at the same time. And then, as you've said, Rory, underpinning that is the emotional change, the looking at self, the exploring who am I really. And that sometimes the scales may fall from the eyes. You see the world differently, you feel differently about the world, and it's pretty lonely because you can't really share that with those that are not going on the course with you as well. So friends and family may be going, what do you mean? It can be really, really tough, and that we see it coming up again and again and again. I think from my personal point of view, the first thing is to not be too hard on yourself. It's okay. You're gonna get there step at a time. If you look up and you see this massive big mountain and go, I've got to climb this whole big mountain, it can get really, anxiety producing. It certainly was for me. And I found my best way was to have a plan in place beforehand, because that meant all I needed to do was look down and watch my feet and go, one more step, go to placement, do my notes, take it to supervision, back into college, do the assignment work. But I must say I had it was tricky when I was doing my assignment work, because the demands of the real world were still around at that time. So what I did was I planned my annual leave around when my assignments were due. And I went away. I left my family and I went and stayed in a B&B and just closed the curtains of the door. I didn't come out, Rory. I just sat there doing my assignments. And that was my way of coping with that, so that I could cut out all of the external noise.
I never knew that, Ken. I never knew that you did that. That's the first time I've heard that. It's amazing. But yeah, that was Ken's way of doing it. We wish I'd have thought of that, to be honest. And of course, there's the life that goes on around you. My mum died. I had lots of family disruption. My wife went into hospital for an incredibly life-threatening operation. There was some days where it was just hard enough to put one foot in front of the other. So yeah, what I would say is just say to yourself, just a little bit further. When it gets tough, just say to yourself, just a little bit further, one foot in front of the other. And also, I think probably lower your expectations. Don't look at the mountain, just look at the path in front of you, because it can be very, very overwhelming. And I think the journey is best summed up by a student that I taught. And when she qualified, she said to me, do you know what the best thing about qualifying is? I said, I don't know, having the qualification, being able to practice, calling yourself a qualified counsellor. She said, no, being able to see my kitchen table, a dining table in the kitchen was covered in books. And she hadn't actually seen what the colour of the table was for 2 years.
Wow.
And eventually she took the books and put them away, and she went on to have a quite a stellar career. I follow her on LinkedIn, and she's still doing the great work. She's still ploughing the new ground, but it is tough. Don't put rose-coloured glasses on. I'll put it into perspective. About a year after, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I did a teaching qualification, a 2-year Cert Ed, which is a kind of, I think it was level 5 at the time, teaching qualification. It was a doddle. It was literally like a walk in the park. I turned up and I thought, it's going to be another 2 years of, struggle. It was so easy. And it wasn't because I'd got any cleverer in that 2 years of taking my diploma. It was because the workload was so high that when I went into another piece of education, it was noticeable how low the workload was. I effectively had to turn up, do some assignments, do some work in the classroom, and do a few experiments. And at the end of 2 years, I ended up qualifying. Off I went.
Wow.
So yeah, don't. If you've got it, I think the thing is, if you've got it in your heart, if you've got heart for the work, heart for helping people, that's gonna bring you through. So have a long think and have a long conversation, a long chat with your nearest and dearest, because I guarantee that you won't be seeing much of them. But perhaps a more rounded perspective's needed. So Sarah joins us from Greenwood Counselling Academy, and she'll tell us about the academic discipline side.
Whether you're a student or a qualified practitioner, you're going to know that one of the biggest challenges that we face is that we never get to see another counsellor using skills in a real session with a real client. That's why Counselling Tutor created the Counselling Skills Academy, where you can watch 6 full client sessions from contracting and risk assessment right through to endings, demonstrated and evaluated by qualified therapists. Real sessions with a real client, not actors, not role plays. Visit counselingskillsacademy.com to watch a free session. counselingskillsacademy.com.
So hi Sarah, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing okay, thanks. How are you?
All right, apart from my voice, which I'm hoping is going to hold up. It's up and down a bit. So Ken and myself have been speaking about the general commitment of time and what you have to negotiate kind of outside the classroom in terms of making sure that, you may have a job, you may have childcare commitments, or, you may have, it's not unusual for people to have 2 or 3 jobs nowadays. But in terms of inside the classroom and the wider expectations of training, what are students really expected to be able to manage and kind of evidence?
Across all the levels of training, whether it's kind of level 2, the diploma level, or post-diploma training, I think that there is a consistent expectation that counselling training is a noticeable adjustment to the life that you lived prior. So there has to be a very well considered overview of personal life pre-training to have a look at the ways in which you can make space, adjust commitments, so that what the counselling training needs can actually be accommodated in the student's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if you're doing introduction or certificate, that's a maybe an easier process or a process that's more clearly manageable than if you're doing diploma or degree. Because at that point, when you move into diploma or degree territory, certainly here in the United Kingdom, you're obviously juggling a lot. You've got 2 years, if you're doing a diploma, of really intense learning. And I think the first thing is a former trainer who trained counsellors for 10 years was getting hold of the idea that every lesson counts, right?
Those guided learning hours are there for a reason. And the material that's within those hours, the scheme of work, the practicing, all of it adds up. And to miss some of that, ultimately what students are doing is missing not only the opportunity to gather new information, but to practice the execution of those skills. So you're right. When it comes to the diploma level, you're taking on new knowledge, and you're also expected to do some self-guided learning outside of the classroom, and every single one of those hours add up.
Yeah, it's true. And it's very difficult if you miss a lesson to catch up, because this isn't kind of like book learning or writing like traditional classroom work as was when I was at school. This is experiential work. Every single lesson links into the next. It's like a chain. And if you miss too many of the links, the chain isn't strong, and also you can't join it all together. So, I mean, for me, one of the things I used to say to students when they enrolled was, you have to turn up at every lesson. And I get it that emergencies happen, that life happens, and we're not saying that, if your nearest and dearest is mortally ill, lying in a hospital bed, after the accident, you should put your learning first. But I think developing a mindset of learning first is important. Prioritising, what can be managed maybe after the learning session, as opposed to letting the outside dictate the inside.
It's so true, especially when you think about the fact that counselling training involves a massive amount of relational development, and the people that you are in the classroom with, whether it's peers or tutors, those relationships are also what build over the consistent attendance of sessions. And so it's not just the academic side of learning, but also that developmental side of growing together and simultaneously with the people in the space, to be in and out of that, to have those relationships suffer those fractures because the attendance isn't there, can be problematic, and students can feel left behind. They can feel isolated, or that there's a kind of mismatch in the relationships because they're lacking information and knowledge. And we've all got lives, right?
Yeah.
You know, as trainers, we have lives too. So there is an element of practicing what we preach with this, in that we also turn up for lessons and have to commit to what it is that we're doing in the classroom, and managing our lives outside of the classroom as best we can, and making those ethical decisions about, right, okay, is this the right thing for me to be doing now if I can't uphold the commitment that the course needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you want to look to that, as a course tutor, I taught for 10 years. Do you know how many lessons I missed in 10 years?
Go on.
Didn't miss any, including a lesson where the college was closed. I actually set a lesson up when the college was snowed in and no one could get in. And I set some work on the virtual learning environment. So you know, tutors, think of your tutor not turning up and saying, well, you know, I don't feel well. I mean, if people are not well, they should attend to themselves. But generally speaking, tutors do turn up, and the reason they turn up is they know the importance of being present to be able to deliver the learning. And if you're not there to receive it, you know, you're gonna lose out. I also think that what can happen, and this is a bit of a contentious subject really, here we go. Hold on tight. is that the other learners can get a little bit uninvested in you. So you're going through this together, you're training together, you become very close. And if you miss training day after training day, what happens is that the other learners they lose confidence in you, I think.
Yeah, you can become an emotional liability to the peers that you're working with.
There you have it.
It's a truth about the environment. There's those contracts that are drawn up at the start of the training where you all make a commitment to each other. This isn't isolated learning. There is an element of camaraderie in a counselling training space where you know that each other are vital to your own success. And so, a peer who hasn't been in attendance of sessions and then is tasked with writing you feedback or observations, they can be a liability to your learning experience because they don't know what they're talking about. And that's the sad truth, which I think as a trainer is an important thing to call out, is that this isn't an individual learning experience, it's a collective one. And so, the choices that you make as a candidate affect your peers by default.
Yeah, you make very good points about that, because I think for people of a certain age, and I'm maybe talking about myself, when we went to school, the teacher would stand and kind of pontificate at the board. We would write notes, and then we would go off and submit whatever it was. Those days have gone, because it's evidence that form of learning doesn't work. Vicarious learning, where you learn off each other. That's why we have breakout groups. That's why we have, conversational groups. That's why we have skills, because that is where we learn off each other. We learn more. And if you're not in the space, you cannot just do it off the notes. Well, can someone give me the notes? Well, they can, but the context of what's written down is nothing like the learning you need to get. And I guess that takes me on to my other. This is like teachers grumbling. My other hobby horse of taking holidays during term time. Now, I know if you've got children, you pay a ridiculous premium to take your children on holiday during the school holidays. They rack the prices up. and for some it's totally unaffordable. But I guess, and I'm not kind of judging here, but what are the consequences of taking 2 weeks out of a course, especially a practice-based course like a diploma or a degree?
Oh, it can be massive. It can be massive. When it comes to a diploma, missing 2 weeks, especially if they are kind of theoretical and academic-based weeks, you can miss a vital component of the learning that you're then meant to experientially carry out. And look, I get it. I get it. I think I started my training and my daughter was 4 years old. And I suppose it boils down to how much do you want it?
Yeah.
How much do you want to do this training and to achieve the qualification? And I think that skirting around the fact that sacrifices have to be made somewhere does no one any favours.
No.
If you want this, you are going to have to sacrifice something.
Yeah.
Whether it is staying up a little bit later to finish an essay, whether it is missing somebody's big birthday celebration because you've got a fitness to practice assessment, whether it is a holiday, all of these things, the things that are luxurious for us to participate in may well need to be sacrificed in order to achieve the thing that it is as a student you say you want.
Yeah, and I think, as Ken and myself alluded to, it's a conversation that you have to have, I guess, with your partner if you're in a relationship, because it does take a lot of your time. I used to say it'll take up all of your waking hours, and most of you're dreaming at night because it's the totality of being immersed in the work. And we've not even really touched on things like supervision. Going to regular supervision,
Yep.
And placement training. And I think getting a placement can be tough, but more and more now placements are doing kind of training programs or onboarding, where they're onboarding you. And that can take time. They may say you need to come for a day's training. You have to be prepared for that.
Prepared for all of those additional elements, the additional client work that's happening on a diploma or degree level, the personal therapy that's required, not only completing your homework, but potentially participating in CPD, not only to fulfill your ethical requirements, but to also firm up the knowledge that happened in the classroom, collaborating with peers. It all takes time. And therefore, to step into this with the understanding that something somewhere has to give is how students can best set themselves up for success.
Yeah, and I guess what you're moving into is professional life. I was listening carefully to what you had to say, and I thought nothing's really changed when I got qualified, because professional life is like that. In the when you're working in any professional environment, you're not. Sometimes there isn't a hard stop for something. You may have to do some extra work. I mean, as a former teacher, and we know all about that. But I know people who work in the law. They do. I've got a good friend who's a car mechanic. He spends a lot of time studying how cars work and the engines in his own time. Yeah. So professional life tends to be like that. I think the way to think about it is you're entering a career, not a job.
Yes.
It's a career. And with a career brings extra demands, whether we like it or not. I'm not saying it's right, but whether we like it or not, there is expectations that we must fulfill. And it starts really in training.
It starts in training, and that the professionalism, I think, is vitally important and something that can be overlooked or dismissed when people think about our industry. It's not this kind of woolly, fluffy niceness where you waltz in and you waltz out, and so long as you're nice, that cuts it. No, there is way much more that's required in order to uphold the professionalism and the management of your time, the management of your emotional resources and capacity, and the management of boundaries has to start in the classroom in order for you to stand a chance of upholding that in a career. There's no part of this that you can avoid if what you're wanting to do is to do it with integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder what kind of gems of wisdom we can pass on to anybody who's a bit unsure. I'll start with one. Maybe if you're thinking of enrolling on to do a practice-based course where you're going to be working with clients, maybe your tutors may bring in people who are already training, and they would give you a Q&A. The tutors would leave you, and you could ask them anything you want, or ask someone who's training, or ask someone who's qualified, and they will give you not the rose-tinted version. They would give you the kind of
warts and all.
Warts and all, yeah. What advice would you offer if you were proffering advice?
I would offer something not too dissimilar, but in your personal life, is to actually think about the people who are in your nuclear setup in your personal life and to have those honest conversations there. I'm going to need help in certain spaces. We are going to need to make sacrifices in certain spaces, because counselling training will impact those people around. So it's about having those conversations up front so that you are actually making an informed decision, not just about what is going to happen in the classroom, but the ways in which your life is going to be shaped as well.
Well, I think those are wise words from someone who is at the pointy end of training, Sarah. So with that said, back to you, Ken, in the studio.
If you're studying counselling, the student library from Counselling Tutor is like having your own tutor alongside you. Every theory and skill in plain English, mapped to your specific course and level. Visit counsellingtutor.com, click on the Products tab, and select Student Library for more information. That's counsellingtutor.com. Always a pleasure to hear from our roving correspondent, Sarah Henry. Yeah, that's in the trenches, doing the work at the front line there. Lots of wisdom and lots to take away from there. And this has been episode 373 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
We started off with ethical and sustainable practice. Ken and myself talked about making decisions around AI in counselling. And of course, we made reference to the book that's going to be published, Ethical AI in Practice for Counsellors and Psychotherapists, which will be available on Amazon. In Practice Matters, we caught up with Erene, and she spoke about the changes in the law in England and Wales regarding the police accessing your counselling notes. It's a must listen to, and one that I would suggest people share with colleagues, because there'll be a lot of people who probably won't know the changes in the law. So you can do a colleague a favour and share this, because I think it'll be really helpful for them. And in student services, we did a warts and all dive into balancing time and training, the reality of being a counselling student. Ken and myself talked about the personal demands of training to be a counsellor, and we caught up with our external correspondent, Sarah Henry, who talked about the in-class demands that are expected when you take up formal training to become a counsellor. As always, we thank you for your likes, shares and subscribes, and until the next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.